Today I'm very pleased to introduce you to Alexandra Bake. Her passions are books, libraries, and heritage buildings. As a child growing up in Spain, she was an avid reader, in particular of the children's classics. She was educated in England, France, and Queen's University, Kingston. After 20 years of various adventures and various careers, she moved to the county in 2003, quickly becoming a valued member of our community. Her first venture was as the owner of a used bookstore called Olivia & Co., which later merged with Books on the Bay and became Books & Co. Is that correct? Okay. Following her passion for heritage buildings, she's been involved with the restoration of several Main Street buildings in Picton, including Gilbert and Lighthall and the Lipson Building, which is home to Books & Co. and a cafe. Currently, she owns Magpie and owns and operates Magpie and Gilbert and Lighthall Marketplace. It's her passion for books and heritage architecture that led her down Main Street to the Picton Library, where she became the chairperson of the fundraising committee to renovate and expand that beloved old building. Please join me in welcoming Alexandra as she takes us on her journey on Main Street.
Hello everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Nancy.
Yeah, it's a bit wobbly.
Okay, so I don't have pictures for you, so you're just going to have to listen to me talk for the next 20 minutes or so, and then I can answer any questions that you might have. So I first came to Picton in 2000. My parents had chosen, much to the surprise of their 4 children, to retire to Prince Edward County. And yes, we all went through that old trope, Prince Edward where? I had attended Queen's University in Kingston in the early 80s, but had never heard speak of the county, nor had I ventured south of the 401 in all of my subsequent travels backward and forth. So it was to my great surprise and delight that I discovered this hidden gem of a community. My parents, who had traveled widely throughout their lives and who brought their family up across many continents, felt instantly at home in the county. My mother found, as a New Zealander, that the natural beauty and gentle way of life was deeply reminiscent of her childhood. My father, who had never enjoyed country living, he was a city boy at heart, he embraced life in the county. He was of Dutch origin, although he was born and spent his early childhood in Indonesia. In those days they called it the Dutch East Indies. He found much in common with the many Dutch immigrants who had made their homes in the county and was soon deeply involved in many aspects of the community. My siblings and I were amazed by the joyful way that my parents embraced their rural idyll, and soon an annual summer pilgrimage to the county became part of our family tradition, and that continues to this day. Fast forward 3 years and I found myself at a crossroad. For the previous dozens of years or so, I had worked in a graphic design and marketing agency specializing in new home development. We sold the dream of home ownership, the community where families could live, work, and play. But I was becoming more and more disenchanted with my life, which seemed to mirror the sterile, soulless communities I spent my life promoting. More a dream than a reality, I felt. It was time for me to move on and find my own passion. In the summer of 2003, while visiting my parents in Picton, on the cusp of a trip to Europe to think about my future, I had stopped at the wonderful used bookstore that then existed in Picton called Traveller's Tales to stock up on books for my trip. I struck up a conversation with the owner, who told me that she would be closing the bookstore that year unless she could find someone foolish enough to buy it. Now, who has not had a dream about owning a used bookstore? I certainly had. Growing up as a young teenager in Madrid, Spain, I spent hours at the only English bookstore in the city, which just happened to be a short bike ride away from our home. The junior school I went to did not have a library, and I was a voracious reader. the bookstore staff would allow me to sit quietly in a corner and read to my heart's content. Once I arrived at boarding school in England, the school library became a place of refuge for my homesick heart. And later, when I spent a few years in London, I worked at the Antiquarian Booksellers Association, running antiquarian book fairs around the UK. So here I was in the summer of 2003, traveling through the southern hills above Granada, re-evaluating my life and dreaming about becoming the proprietor of a used bookstore in Picton, Ontario. It was a mad dream, but when I shared it with my travel companion, the resounding response was, "Go for it." Books were now going to play a larger part in my future. My parents were worried. Why would I want to leave the excitement of the city for a small town full of retired folk like them? Despite their concerns, and with a few trepidations of my own, in December of 2003, I left Toronto behind and moved to Prince Edward. Where? And so a love affair began. It was slow at first. The town felt small, and I wasn't sure that I could settle in a place where everyone knew your name. However, Picton in those days literally had everything that you needed within the downtown core. In addition to the 2 bookstores, 1 new, 1 used, the library, the theatre, the hospital, there were all the services, banks, lawyers, a dry cleaner, 2 hardware stores, 2 grocery stores, 3 florists, Lipson's department stores, Stedman's, and the Giant Tiger to boot. There were gas stations, coffee shops, boutiques, banks, restaurants, bars, and the town was anchored with a liquor store and a beer store. There were two parks plus the harbour, Macaulay Mountain, and there were 2 newspapers full of local community news. And the Gazette was published twice a week in those days. The arts community was thriving, and the throngs of summer visitors were welcomed on arrival and celebrated on departure as residents got back to the serious business of living and socializing over the quieter off-season. It felt like a place one could belong. It felt like a place where I could become part of the community, and I was welcomed with open arms. However, 2003 was a hard year for Picton. SARS deeply affected the tourism industry, and Lipson's department store announced that they would be closing. The town lost a cherished institution when the St. Francis Bakery closed. And in addition, there were 2 major fires in town that year. One which burnt down a large block of buildings in the center of town, where the post office is now, and one massive conflagration on New Year's Eve, which burnt down half a block of buildings on the corner of Main and Elizabeth, where the parking lot and dollar store are now. I woke up on New Year's Day 2004, ready to face my future, with Picton being headline news on the CBC. It was daunting, but then like a phoenix rising from the ashes, there was a whole group of younger people, like myself, who moved into the community with lots of energy and opened businesses. To name a few, Kelly's, the Bean Counter, Robin's Nest, Portobello, the Merrill Inn. A renaissance was underway, and Picton's renaissance was mirrored across the county with the birth of many wineries, the agri-tourism, and fine dining. Taste the County, the Arts Trail, and the Taste Trail were a few of the many exciting initiatives which were fermenting around us. They were heady days. From the window of my used bookstore, Olivia & Company, which is located where Bonkers is now, I looked out on a beautiful building which had recently housed the Public Utilities Commission. It was vacant, and it had been allowed to go to rack and ruin. But it had beautiful bones, and I felt that if only I could get my hands on that building, it would be so exciting. I'm happy to say that I have had the privilege of restoring and caring for that building, which now houses Rosehaven Yarn Store. Typical to many small towns, the heritage buildings in Picton were generally not well maintained. The lower levels were primarily occupied by retail or service industries, and the upper floors, if occupied at all, were low-cost slum rentals, housing the seasonally employed who lived on UI for the balance of the year. These places were often fire traps and hazardous for their occupants. Operating a retail business on Main Street was truly a case of feast or famine, and despite all the efforts to serve the community year-round with activities and events, the off-season remained very slow. How to address that, I thought to myself. One of those ways was to bring more people to live on Main Street. All of those unoccupied upper floors could be filled with people who live, work and play on Main Street, providing a year-round customer base or workers for the business below. Luckily for me, the historic Gilbert Lighthall building on the corner of Main and Elizabeth was available for purchase. It was a solid 3-story building, and it was primed for conversion to apartments above and retail below. My brothers and I jumped at the opportunity. We also purchased the hardware store next door, which had been reduced to one level in a fire in the mid-70s. We began the task of restoring the damaged sister building, and by the end of 2006, both buildings had been renovated and fully restored, including a matching new facade, so that it looked like it had when the buildings were first built in 1892. Just as an aside, we took 3 months to find the right color brick, and we had so many arguments with the builder about why we were putting washers and dryers into the building, because really, why would you put a washer and dryer in an apartment building above a retail store on Main Street? It now houses 11 beautifully appointed apartments and 3 retail stores. A passion for Picton Main Street and what made it special was ignited in me, and I became involved in many organizations, including the BIA. I partook in a bid to create a hub for the arts in 2005-2006. There was a restoration fund post-SARS, we had a dream, and that was to tie the Regent Theatre and the library and the armory into one big arts and cultural hub, and to house the archives in that space. And behind the Regent, there was going to be a building built with a parking garage and apartments, and it was going to just be like this amazing centre in the middle of Picton. Unfortunately, we didn't get the FEDDEV grant, and that dream faded. However, the advocacy committee that I was part of fought valiantly on many fronts. We fought to stop the expansion of the No Frills and the Canadian Tire, which wanted to add a Mark's warehouse and put more box stores in that area. We ended up getting $50,000 for the BIA, which eventually put sidewalks and added some needed infrastructure into Picton, including the washrooms in Benson Park. And we fought the post office. I don't know if any of you were here then when the post office was moving from it into its new location, and they wanted to put mega boxes all over our beautiful historic town, and that was quite the fight. We did end up losing the fight, and the hardware store moved out to Warren's Corner, but there was a determination, and something I still feel really strongly about, to keep as many core services in the downtown as we can in order to keep people coming to Main Street Picton. The post office and the library and theatre are all just so germane to maintaining the viability of Main Street. So, as you heard, in 2008, I joined forces with Books on the Bay, and we moved into Books and Company in the Lipson building. And Miss Lily's Cafe was opened as well. That for me was truly a dream come true. The cafe created a year-round traffic to support the bookstore, and the large open space, which we called the Lipson Room, became a community hub with any number of events and activities, from readings and plays to art shows and Christmas craft fairs. The dream, yeah, it just makes my heart sing when I think about, everybody used to, we'll meet you at Lily's, or we'll meet you at the bookstore. And, it was just such a focal point. It was wonderful. And our dream to put more people on Main Street was enriched by when my brothers and I embarked on the construction of the F.O.W.L building. It too was built on a lot where there had been heritage buildings ravaged by fire. And we were very happy to be able to put that building into Main Street. And they were heady days. There were so many exciting things happening around our changing community, and such a sense of optimism and buoyancy. So fast forward to 2017. I had been keeping a low profile after the loss of my mother in 2016, whom I had nursed through a devastating degenerative illness for several years. And at that point, I'd also left the bookstore and Miss Lily's Cafe. So when Barbara Sweet of the library asked me to participate in conversations around the future of the library, I was excited. I had worked with her on the Authors Festival in County Peaks for many years, and was so pleased to hear that plans were once again afoot to address the deficiencies in the existing Picton Library. When the survey was done in 2017, one of the questions that was asked was, did people want the library to stay on Main Street, or did they want a purpose-built library on the outskirts of town? And thankfully, the majority of users wanted the library to stay where it was. And that was the sort of driving force that led Barbara and the board of the library at the time to believe that the time was right for the renovation and expansion. Strong anchors, as we know, are linchpins in our community, and our library is such a loved and well-used anchor in the heart of downtown. So, you probably all know this, but our library in Picton was built in 1907 on the backs of a campaign or a challenge issued by Andrew Carnegie to communities across Canada and America, that depending on the size of your community, you were asked to raise a sum of money to prove that you deserved the library. And so, due to the size of our community, the amount of money that the residents of Picton in those days, because it was literally just that township, had to raise $10,000 in 1907. That was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And they did that. And as a consequence, they got their Carnegie Library. And from 1907 to 2017, when we started, or 18, when we started this campaign, there had literally been almost nothing done to that poor library. There was a change in the 60s when the existing magnificent staircase from the front door had to be changed, because it meant that there was these two little narrow staircases on either side of it, which were the only egress to the basement, and our modern sensibilities didn't allow for that kind of entry. It's deemed dangerous. So the front entrance was changed. They built a very small little addition for collections at the back side of the library. And then in 2002, they built another very small addition to house the elevator. But the washrooms, I don't know if any of you remember them, were woefully inadequate, and you risked your life every time you walked down that corridor for fear of someone stepping out of the washroom and slamming you in the face with the door. Anyway, there were lots of reasons why Picton Library needed to be expanded. And in the spring of 2018, Barbara approached me and asked me if I would be the honorary, and I say that with a pinch of salt, chair of the fundraising committee, because they wanted somebody with roots in the community that would give credence to their campaign. And at that time, the expansion had been budgeted at $1,200,000, and they had $1 million already committed from bequests and development charge funds and the monies that the county government was giving us from taxes. So it seemed like a no-brainer to me. Little did I know. So we started this fundraising campaign, and even before it started, the price started to go up. So we went from 1 million to 2 million needing to be raised, and then from 2 million to 2,000,008, and then from 2,000,008, our final figure came in at $3,350,000. So it felt like we were constantly chasing a moving target. But when we started back in 2018, we literally had a floor plan, a rendering, and a really big dream. I'd never been involved in fundraising before. I certainly do not continue to not have an easy time asking people for money. So it's a real pinch me moment to actually believe that we succeeded. And I believe that we succeeded because we were naive, and we really just had a very simple plan of attack. It was inclusive, and what we did was we undertook to build a case for support, one community event at a time. And luckily for us, the community really stepped up. You know, over the course of the campaign, we had 80 plus volunteers, who brought their passion and their expertise and their enthusiasm to organizing an extraordinary number of fundraising activities. You know, we started with a bang with our altar event for David F.O.W.L. When we filled the Regent Theatre. He was talking about Trumpocracy. He could be talking about Trumpocracy again today. Some things never change. But in the meantime, we built a library. We were also really hampered. We were hampered in many ways. We were building a municipally owned building on municipally owned land, offering an essential service, and we needed the public to pay for it because we live in a municipality which is really, unfortunately, not able to step up. Most libraries that you hear, most new build community libraries or renovations or restorations are paid for anywhere from 70 to 90% by municipal funds, and the balance is where the patrons step in to choose the furnishings and help with the bookcases and maybe add to the collection. So it was something that was unimaginable. It had not been done. When we talked to the Southern Ontario Library Services manager, she was like, not something we've ever seen happen before. So, so the other thing that hampered us was the fact that libraries are not allowed to run lotteries for some reason. Hospitals can. Pretty much any other charitable institution can. Libraries, for some reason, by legislation, cannot run a lottery or a raffle unless the raffle takes place on the day at an event and is finished at that time. And due to the nature of our library, which is one library, 6 branches, which it therefore services the whole of the community of 25,000 people, was not eligible for Trillium grants because the cutoff point for population for Trillium grants is 21,000 people. And we're 25. And so it seemed like every way that we turned to try to encourage or try to reach out beyond our pool of local residents to find ways to raise money, we were stymied. So our goal became engaging as many different segments of the community as we could in as many different ways as we could think of to meet them where they lived, basically. So if we could engage people where their interests were, then we were hoping that we could bring our story to them, and then that would in turn help us. And we did. We had trivia nights, bake sales, tag sales, fundraising barbecues. We even ran a used bookstore in Main Street for a while. We engaged people that didn't normally come to the library to join us for events like the Night in the Library, so they could see for themselves why it was so necessary to undertake this expansion. We held comedy nights and arts nights. We had that massive art auction. We had dinner parties across the county where local chefs paired with hostesses, and guests paid for dinner, and all the proceeds went to the library. Each of these events was really aimed at bringing the library story to life. The library, as you know, is such a welcoming and all-inclusive place, and we tried to welcome and include everybody that we could to come back to support us. And we did. We built an incredible groundswell of support along the way, which kept the campaign going through its darkest days. And believe me, there were very many dark days. Our ability to run community fundraisers came to an abrupt end with COVID. And that came on the heels of Council's decision not to allow us to move forward with our build until we had 100% commitment or pledges for 100% of the cost of building, which is unheard of in any capital campaign. And then at the same time, Back the Build just swung right into gear. And how could we fight or ask community for money when there was a worldwide pandemic going on, and obviously the hospital was important. The joyful part of that story was through the pandemic, the library pivoted its services to such an amazing extent. They moved online. They allowed people to pick up books from their front doors. They became more relevant than ever. And then when the doors opened again with social distancing, it became increasingly obvious that the Picton Library just was not able to service the needs of its patrons, and it was lacking in so many ways. And the reaffirmation of support happened in so many different ways. We would get people stopping. I would get people stopping me on the street and just sort of constantly, "How's it going with the library? How's the library?" And you could tell that there was a genuine interest and enthusiasm. I would get people that would hand me $5 bills and go, "I'm sorry, it's not more, but I just want to help." And actually about 4 times during the course of the campaign, during the course of the COVID darkness, I had people just randomly they would say to me, "Oh, how are things going?" And I would miraculously, a few days later, get a check that would make my heart sing. It was really so important to that small team of volunteers that reaffirmation time and time again how important the library was. Because remember, at that point, we did not have shovel in the ground yet. And there was truly a sense that, that project was tipped on the balance. And if we hadn't been able to move forward, then there was the daunting task of how do you give money back to people? You're never going to be able to afford to do this again, because we all know the costs are just going to keep escalating. So it was really such a balancing act. And then I was doing a presentation to Rotary And as part of that, there was a conversation, how is the library going? And I got a phone call after that presentation, and this person wanted to come and talk to me, so we met, and they said, well, how much do you need? How much would really make a difference to your campaign? And I had a really hard time asking for money, so I'm there going, well, $20,000 would really help. And they just laughed at me. They said, how about 100,000? And I burst into tears. I couldn't believe. And so we ran a match fund campaign that fall. And on the backs of getting that commitment and the way that people responded to our match fund campaign, which has always been fantastic, but this one in particular, we were able to convince a local businessman to backstop the amount of money that we were short, which at the time was $500,000. And we went back to council. And we said, in the deepest and darkest days of this, COVID, we have people that are coming forward because this library is really important. And we have somebody who's committed to backstopping the project if you give it the go-ahead. And miraculously, they agreed. So we were able to go and put a shovel in the ground in 2022. And the rest really sort of speaks for itself. The rest of the ups and downs, and there continue to be many. I could go on for hours, but the reality is that Picton Main Street is richer today because our community stepped up. There were over 950 individual donors who wrote a check or donated online to support the campaign, and many of those people wrote repeated checks year after year. There was the women's clubs, the service clubs, the churches, the Friends of the Library, the businesses across the county who stepped up to promote and donate. There was the anonymous donors who put pennies in the jar, or who bought a tag, or who ate a pie, or who, had a donut, had a hot dog, a fundraising event. But every donation counted. Every single penny went to that build. And at the end of the day, we raised over $3,400,000. $3,400,000. And we were able to build that long overdue, much needed addition to our beloved Carnegie Library. And for me, it's so heartwarming to see the throngs of people who walk into the library and discover it for the first time. And they see the plentiful clean washrooms, the community pantry, the music lending library, the soundproof recording booth, the bookable meeting rooms, the living wall. They have quiet spaces where you can read, or places to work, or to study. The tech hub is amazing with all its humming machines and the 3D printers and the stitching, printing machines and everything else that they have. And to my joy, they also have a much expanded collection as well because of the extra space.
They have books.
Yeah, yeah, they have books. The children's area is alive. Their programming is growing. I read a report 2 days ago that said that through December, because traditionally the following tends to fall off around that time, they had numbers that were bigger than ever before through the whole of December at all of their children's programming, which is amazing. The Flex Space is now home to 4-H club and fitness, functional fitness, and to all kinds of community activities and meetings, and it's being used increasingly all the time, which is fantastic. And I am so proud to have been able to contribute to the success of this project. But it was a real team effort, and it really makes my heart sing every time I walk into that inspiring, light-filled space, and know that it will stand as a beacon for our vibrant Main Street as it continues to evolve and change. Thank you for coming. I did talk a bit longer than I thought, but anyway, I can talk the hind leg off a donkey when it comes to Main Street and Picton. And I'm really proud to have played a small part in the evolution of Picton Main Street as those did that came before me. And I will be passing the baton on and hoping that one day somebody else's passion will become what was mine. But in the meantime, thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, let me know.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So is the person who was offering to backstop the build, his or her funds were never needed? When I was
So
done that?
1 penny was needed,
Wow.
and in the end of the day, they didn't donate 1 penny either.
Oh, that's curious.
I guess they were approached at the right time, and they had a bone to pick, so they stepped up to the plate and said, yeah, we're going to show council. And at the end of the day, we showed council, and I had promised him that we wouldn't ever use any of his money, and we didn't, which is great.
So what do you think next needs to be done in Picton?
That's, I'm personally really heartbroken by the fact that the Bank of Montreal is moving out of Picton Main Street. And I hope for our town's sake that the core remains vibrant. The Royal Hotel has certainly added a lot to Main Street. This coming year is going to be very hard because it's been very hard on small business since COVID. But I have confidence that once again, Main Street will rise like Phoenix from the ashes, and there will be a new evolution. But the people that have moved to the county have different priorities now, and so some of the things that I might have thought were important in my day are not necessarily as important anymore. So we need to recognize that COVID changed us profoundly, and it changed the way that we do business, it changed the way that we live, and Main Street will have to evolve and adopt accordingly. And I'm very excited by things like a standalone pickleball court in Delhi Park, because I think it'll bring a huge amount of life and activity to a part of our town that is barely used by anybody. There are more. I think the completion of the boardwalk down at the harbour will add a lot, and I would love to see more animation at the harbour. And we have that amazing asset, which is barely used at all. And then, I think that if we can all just continue to support what we have, and doing things like, going to the library on Main Street, going to the theatre on Main Street, using what we have, will ensure that vibrancy remains, because it's really putting feet on the street that matter. It truly is. That's what creates, we were talking about hollowed out cores before, but your community becomes a hollow core when people don't frequent it. And the reason why people will frequent your Main Street is if you give them activities or if you cater to what their interests and activities are. So having a bunch of stores that nobody wants to go to isn't actually an answer. It's trying to find that magic, whatever it is, the je ne sais pas quoi, that brings people back into your core and keeps them coming back. Parking is an issue for Main Street. I personally am a huge fan of the outdoor cafes and anything that can animate the street. I know a lot of my colleagues of fellow business owners are not, because parking, and it's a very narrow-minded, small-town sort of battle, I think. But it's one that needs to be fought and it needs to be won, because I think the more animation we can put on the street, the better. What would you like to see on Picton Main Street?
More walkable places.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, they've done a really good job. The post office, unfortunately, I think the post office is too large. I hate to see barren storefronts, and to me the
I
post
agree.
office is that. It could be
Oh, yeah.
emphasized.
I
But on
agree.
the other hand, most of what I see in Picton is actually useful, like Belleville. Belleville should be great, but most of their storefronts are like lawyers' offices and just sort of
Exactly.
useless storefronts that
Yeah.
don't be anywhere.
Yeah.
So they have to be livable, they have to be lively places that people will want to stop and walk by, places that are interesting.
I agree.
And it's really good to see the good COVID thing about having the outside patios is fantastic. It's
Yeah.
great to continue those.
Yeah.
It'd be great to see those all the way along.
I agree. I would love to see no parking on one side of the street and just
They've done a great thing about having the free
sidewalks.
parking lots in the back, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. That's
Yeah.
a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have any questions?
You know what's going into the Bank Montreal building?
No, I don't. Lots of speculation.
So they're moving out here next to the Wendy's or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I'm surprised. Yeah, that big blue building, we thought, oh, it'd be something useful, this is great, it's just a bank.
I know. It's,
But it's surprising to see any banks, to tell you the truth, any bank branches. I thought most of them, our Scotia Bank, thankfully, is here. I'm always amazed that it's there. Wow.
Right.
Because bank branches all over the world is closing.
Exactly.
Or turning into cafes. Which
Yeah.
is-
So we've heard lots of rumors, everything from RBC's moving in there, which I very much doubt, but it might happen. There's been rumors around that for years. In fact, everybody, including the staff of the Bank of Montreal, thought that RBC was moving into that building in beside Wendy's. And they were as horrified as most of their staff, their clients were, when they found out that that actually wasn't the case.
Weren't they glad to keep their jobs by moving out there? I'm confused. Oh, I see, they
I
thought they'd stay.
don't think they thought the branch was closed. They thought they were just staying where they were. RBC was moving up there, and that would be great. Yeah.
It's supposed to turn it into a bank cafe.
It could be a bank cafe, or, brewery, or, the one that, or shawarma place, yeah. The one place that I find particularly soulless and would love to see some animation around is the Naval Museum archive. It seems, it's beautiful inside, but nobody, you never see people going in there. So-
I thought it was a mafia front of some sort. Because it didn't seem
Well, it
like
could be.
It-
Otherwise, it's hard to know how they keep going.
Yeah, keep going, yeah,
Yeah.
I think I'm
Was there any chance along the way that there was going to be a benefactor who wanted to have his or her name on the library? Or was that off the table right from the beginning because of the Carnegie Library?
It would have been welcomed with open arms. We could have put any kind of
Mr.
naming
Chance.
at the back of the library. The trouble is that Parrot has already got its name on the Belleville Library. And unless it was a foundation like that, to find a benefactor that would ante up a fair amount of money. I mean, at the end of the day, Parrot gave us $245,000, which was amazing. And we have had several benefactors, actually 3, who gave us $100,000. And then a few in the $50,000 range. But there are no companies, like workforces in the county. The cement plant is asked by everybody to support them, and they're really the only, apart from some of the farms. And the attitude there is, why do we need a library? We had a councillor who shall remain unnamed, but who actually said, why? The library's no good to anyone. at the same time, his children were being coached at the library for free, 1 evening a week. And you come across these entrenched ideas about how unimportant libraries are. And in fact, when I first stood up before service clubs, I remember particularly Kinston, or it was the Lions Club, and the gentleman there said, but libraries aren't relevant to us. And I said, well, do you have a parent that, oh yeah, books get delivered to my mother's house every week, and then do you have, a child that needs music, or, and then you start engaging them on a more micro level as to how the library might be beneficial, and then all of a sudden they start twigging, oh yeah, it is important. And I think that's where things like the community pantry and the Picton Library are really serving such a need, because we know that the food banks are already stretched. And I was talking to somebody the other day at F.O.W.L who I happened to bump into, and she was loading up with tissues, and I made a comment of, why do you need so many boxes of tissues? And she said, well, I was having a hard time making ends meet a couple of weeks ago, and I took some stuff from the community pantry at the library, and so these tissues are on sale, so I'm taking them. And she took 3 packs or 12 packs of tissues with her off to the library, and I thought, okay, so it really is important for people in different ways, and that's the beauty of it. And the beauty of it is that they don't ask questions. They don't make you pay for a fine. There's no charge anywhere. You're welcome regardless of who you are and what you do, what you wear, and how you act. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And we're so lucky to have such a great library in this community. There was an artist in residence at Purdy, Ephraim, and she she organized a reading in the flex space in the fall. And so I was working at back she came in, and she's like, she knew who I was from Adam. She's like, oh, I need to buy something because I need to look presentable for this event that I'm putting on at the library. And so I was like, oh, are you having a good time? You're using our library. And so she told me who she was. She goes, I'm from Kingston, but I have serious library envy. I was like, oh, that was so nice. And I think, we're really, really lucky. We have an incredibly vibrant and just an incredibly vibrant jewel in our community with our library. We really are so lucky.